Welcome back to science class, grade 5 to 8. The calendar is flipped to May. The birds are chirping, the buds are budding, and we are going to do a little bit of growing ourselves. Over the next few weeks, I'm going to walk us step by step through the germination and growth of a plant, and hopefully you'll be able to follow along at home. They call it the musical fruit. And they're good for your heart. The more you eat them, the more, you know. Talking about beans, dry beans, the science sprout. The more you grow them, the less you pout. For those who want to grow along, the designated grocery shopper in your house might tell you that beans are scarce these days, both the dry bagged kind and the canned kind. Now, if you're going to choose between the two of them, you want the dry ones, and the reason is because the canned ones already have been cooked in a sense in the can, and so the germ, the thing that turns into the new plant, is destroyed. So if you don't like dry beans, getting a bag in this size, which is pretty much the only size that is around, might give you a lifetime supply of beans if you don't really like eating dry beans. Now, if you don't have any dried beans and there are none at the store, you still want to play along, any seed will do. But what we like about the bean seed is that it's relatively large, and we're not just going to grow bean plants, but we're going to dissect the seed and take a look in the inside, see how a seed goes to plant through its germination cycle.
A bag of beans will last a long time. So long, in fact, that people make beanbag chairs sometimes.
The only thing more uncomfortable than the futon is the beanbag chair.
But if we were to plant these beans in the ground, they would probably sprout within a few weeks. So what's changed? Beans, like other plant seeds, need to know when it's a good time to germinate. When they're put in moist soil, they begin to take on water and expand. We're going to put these beans into water for 24 hours. And then we'll compare them with other beans to see what's happened.
We are now 24 hours after soaking the beans in water, this little plastic cup. First thing I'm going to do is strain them in a small glass with a metal strainer. And we can see how large they've grown. You can see that the beans that have soaked in water are probably at least twice the size and volume compared to the beans from last night. From these, we're going to select the biggest one to dissect. This one right here. I'm going to set the other ones aside because we are going to germinate with the other ones. In our investigation, we are using the white navy bean. It's certainly white, but it has spent the last 24 hours underwater. The kidney bean is red, but the kidney bean is a much more apt name because all bean seeds look like a human kidney. Sticking with human anatomy for a minute, what we need to do is to zero in on the part of the bean called the hilum. It acts a lot like the umbilical cord for the bean seed. It's oval in shape, and like the umbilical cord, it's what connected the bean seed to its parent bean plant. And this, in the end, its oval shape is basically the belly button of the bean. What we're going to do is, after we've located the hilum, we're going to try to divide up this bean seed into its two halves by making an indent around the perimeter of the bean, starting from the hilum and coming back around the other side. You can probably do it with your fingernail or a small knife. What we're trying to do is to break apart the seed coat that protects the bean around the outside. And there we have it. The two parts of the bean seed, or the two halves, are called cotyledons. A bean seed is a dicot, meaning two. Some seeds are monocots, and they don't divide evenly in half like this one, but the bean seed is a dicot, or two cotyledons. Notice inside, in between, connected to the hilum, we have basically the miniature version of the plant already beginning to grow. We have the stem and even a pair of leaves. That you can easily remove from the cotyledons. This will develop into the full-fledged plant, the leaves, the stem, and the roots, which at this stage are called the radicles. Raticles. The remaining cotyledons will turn out to be food for the developing plant. And you can see how the seed coat at this point, because it's been soaking, can peel right off. So we have a smaller version of the plant, a miniature version of the plant called the embryo. We have the two cotyledons, making this bean seed a dicot. And we have the seed coat, no longer needed once the plant has begun to germinate. It wants to get out and start growing. It's time to set up the germination for our remaining beans. We're going to need a piece of paper towel. We're going to also need an elastic band. The two things that I used earlier, the small plastic cup and the glass, need to be able to nest inside each other like so. What we're going to have is the paper towel around the outside of the smaller nesting cup or glass. And we're going to attach moist paper towel around the outside. Then hold it there with the elastic band and put each of the seeds underneath it. That way, the seeds will remain moist while we can observe them in their germination phases. Place the elastic band around the middle of the smaller cup so that both root and shoot, if you will, root and stem are able to grow in both directions. And then evenly space the beans out underneath the elastic band. And try not to cover the hilum. Because that is where it's going to come out from. So make sure that the hilum is not covered by the elastic band. So we're going to dip this in the glass, allow the water to soak up in the paper towel. Over the next few days, you can monitor both the moisture level of the paper towel, and if it needs more, you can always pour some in the bottom. Try not to cover up the beans completely with water, but make sure the paper towel is moist all the way around. We are now 3 full days since we soaked the seeds, and as you can see, the beans have begun to sprout. What we're going to do today is we're going to look at the length of the root, as it's mainly the roots that has sprouted so far, and we're going to mark the root with a ruler. If you have a very fine-tipped marker that can measure out millimeters, we're going to measure 1 millimeter intervals along the root, and that is going to help us to figure out where the growth along the root is most rapid. As it grows, those 1 millimeter markers will spread out, but where they spread out and by how much is going to be dependent on where most of the growth is. So it's important to keep in mind, if you're taking notes, that we began this on day 0. Okay, day 0 is the starting point. Day 0, the moment when we first began to soak the beans, and day 1, 24 hours later, was when we dissected. Day 2, there wasn't any noticeable effect on the beans, but day 3, where we are now, 3 full days since we first soaked the beans, we have sprouts. We have a visible sign of germination. So this bean seed right here, what I'm going to do is take a small centimeter ruler, and I'm going to take a very fine tipped pen, and I'm going to try and mark out 1 millimeter segments from the root. Now that the root is dry, I'm going to finish marking off my long straight root here. It's easier to do than all the curly ones. Now for this particular bean sprout, we're going to put it back onto the glass as we did before, because we don't want the water to interfere with the markings. What you can do is, if you just slip off the seed coat, it will stay under the elastic band a little bit better. Some of the others were slipping off the elastic band because and the seed coat was left behind. So we're going to put this one back into our glass as we did. And hopefully, as the root grows down in search of water, we will see how the markings spread out. The rest of the seeds we're actually going to attach by the root. The root will continue to grow, but if we have the whole bean underneath the elastic band, it might make it difficult for the leaves to sprout up. So we're going to put the root underneath as much as possible for the remaining sprouts. So have the leaf pointing downwards. That will also keep the root up against the moist paper towel, which of course is where the bean sprout gets its water from, its roots. This one hasn't germinated very well yet, so we're going to keep it underneath the whole thing. And we're going to put it back in the water. Now, some of the water may have evaporated off. Instead of putting the water into the outside glass, what we can do from here on is to actually pour the water into the inside cup until it just overflows. And that, of course, will soak up the leaves. And if it goes down in the middle of the cup, you can always top it off and keep it moist that way. Good luck growing, but remember, never tell secrets in the garden, because the potatoes have eyes, the corn has ears, and the beans talk. And I wouldn't take your cow to market these days. You wouldn't get a very good price. You might as well trade it in for some magic beans. So until next week, may your beans be magical, your roots grow from the radical, and keep safety first.